Hello everyone, my name is Andrei and I will be hosting this event today. I'm happy to introduce Robert Fenwick, who will talk about synthetic data and the future of AI today. And thank you all who joined this Datazen event. Please ask your questions in the chat during the event and we will discuss them at the end of the presentation. So Robert, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andre. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to talking about this really exciting topic that has been in the headlines very recently. And yeah, we'll talk a little bit about some of the current notable examples of utilization of synthetic data, and then I'll give a few perspectives on how things are working. So yeah, my name is Robert. I go by Bryn, and I'm a principal in research and technology at EPAM Systems. So just to give a little bit about myself, I've been a senior leader in technology for the last 20 years or so, and I focus on data-driven transitions in healthcare and life sciences. I have expertise in technology, data, and AI, and increasingly quantum, and aligning those with business goals. So my experiences, as I've said, in technology, I also work a lot in innovation. And today my intent is really to cover some of the kind of more practical perspectives on how emerging data strategies like synthetic data, differential privacy, and federated learning fit into corporate AI roadmaps and digital transformations. So to start with, I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about what synthetic data is. And it's in the context of healthcare and life sciences that I'll focus, primarily because there's really strong use cases in this space, and it'll enable us to look at some nice examples of protecting privacy and also enabling some of the benefits. So synthetic data is just data that is generated through a synthetic function, and this enables the creation of data that is not derived from any one individual, but it mimics the real data distributions. So what we would expect then is that real data, and in this case we could talk about patient data, is used to create a generative model, which then the generative model is used to create a new data set or a synthetic data set that doesn't contain any personal identifiers. So this then reduces the risk of patient re-identification, which is one of the big challenges in using large data sets to generate either AI ML models or to make inference or just test new systems in healthcare. So the key benefits of synthetic data are primarily that it enables analytics and AI to kind of be developed without exposing true patient records. So why would we want to use synthetic data? Well, there are a number of reasons why we might want to do this, right? So primarily there's an enhancement of privacy. So this means that synthetic data by its very nature does not contain any information about a particular individual. So then this mitigates the privacy concerns and significantly reduces the chances that data that are governed by either HIPAA or GDPR are exposed. There's also some regulatory relief. This means that we can bypass some of the kind of lengthy data use requirements and ethics reviews that are required for providing non-identifiable data sets. So what I'm showing here on the right-hand side is that it can take up to kind of 6 to 9 months for traditional IRB approvals, contracts, and all of the validation when you're using real data, whereas Whereas in the case of synthetic data, this can often be generated and then provided for downstream applications almost instantly, right? The time could be days if the data needs to be generated, or even faster if the models exist. There's also the option of data augmentation. So occasionally we find biases, or we find that certain data are underrepresented or overrepresented in a particular data set. So when we work with real data, this bias needs to be mitigated in particular ways. However, we might actually, with a data generator, be able to fix these biases and then leverage the data in a new way, right? So upscale or increase the proportion of missing data that we wish to handle. In addition, as I've said, in addition to this regulatory relief, we can also accelerate research, right? Because we can develop the models which then enable us to make decisions and provide instant access to realistic data for that research, rather than having to wait for the process of getting access to the full real data sets. So there's a number of methods that can be used to create synthetic data, and synthetic data generation by itself could be an entire series of talks. But the methods that we see taking much of the focus today are generative adversarial networks. We also see variational autoencoders and diffusion models also being used in this space. And GANs are a really nice architecture because they enable us to kind of see how privacy is maintained. And so I'm showing an example here on the right-hand side where the process of training the two models enables us to create synthetic data, and then a discriminator is also trained at the same time, that enables us to determine if a sample drawn either from the target samples, which would be the real data, or the fake data coming from the generator network, is indeed a real or fake data point. So as the two models improve over time, you can get very, very strong generative networks that are able to draw and create samples of data which reflect the distribution and also the style of the real data. So there's a number of frameworks that one can use to do this for clinical data. A nice example is the Cynthia project, and this uses clinical rules and population data to simulate full patient life cycles. So this goes from kind of an individual being born all the way through to end of life. So you can get huge amounts of data generated. And I'll say a little bit more about the Cynthia project later on. But essentially what this enables is this data to the creation of this data to be fast-tracked. And there's a number of applications, both in education and training of engineers and data scientists, but also just in terms of testing algorithms or benchmarking algorithms where the real data may actually not be required. There's also kind of statistical and agentic models, so Monte Carlo or agent-based models to simulate population-based probabilities. So what we can do is we can look at a study of a large cohort and try to understand how that might be modulated. And then finally, there are hybrid approaches, right? So these will combine both real data components and also synthetic components. And sometimes these partially synthetic data sets are very useful for organizations because they enable the balance to be maintained in certain instances, but also to create realistic data for those parts that maybe the privacy needs to be retained. So there's a number of different data types that we might consider thinking about for synthetic data. And I'm listing some of these on this slide, primarily just to kind of give you an understanding that there's more than just kind of tabular data that can be generated. A lot of us are very used to using tabular data, and this could be patient demographics, it could be diagnosis, EHR records, these types of data. We can also generate time series data. So we can look at maybe heart rate, or glucose levels, things that are coming from our IoT devices or smart devices or phones today can also be generated. There's the possibility to generate image data as well, right? So whether this is X-rays or MRIs, they can be generated or augmented with AI. We see the generation of genomic data as well in much the same way. We can also see textual data, right? So clinical notes or radiographic reports, or combinations of these types of data, right? So one example might be that you want to generate images and textual data for the same kind of like image, and then use this to develop models. So there's a number of applications, right? So once you have your synthetic data, then the question is kind of what are you doing with it? And what we see today in various different parts of healthcare and life sciences that AI is being used, and so then the synthetic data can be used to train these AI models. So large generative data capture and development enables large models to be developed, also for clinical research, right? So the simulation of clinical trials using synthetic data enables these kind of population-wide studies to be defined and enable kind of decision-making around these populations. We can also see just healthcare IT testing, right? So if you're working with a large organization and you're deploying a new system and you want to test it with a huge amount of data and pressure test it before you start migrating data into it, then using synthetic data is often a really nice approach. It enables you to have realistic data and show analytics, but not have to use the real data of the organization. Also, there's some policy simulation that can be done. And then also, finally, we can talk about digital twins. Digital twins are becoming an incredibly important part of healthcare, especially with the increase in IoT devices. And we see that synthetic data is often used in various different ways, maybe combined with differential privacy mechanisms or federated learning to enable kind of models to be built that predict outcomes or states of health for a given individual. So when we think about synthetic data, there's always this kind of challenge, and there's also a continued risk, right? So data fidelity is a big component. So obviously, one way to think about synthetic data is that we're creating a data set that has some noise associated with it, and that this noise is what is responsible for kind of protecting individual data points, right? So then in the case that we're talking about a rare pattern or subtle observation in the data, these can either be washed out if we increase the amount of noise, or if we don't add sufficient noise, then what can happen is that individuals or individual type data might still be leaked into the model. So we worry a lot about this, and there are various different techniques that we can use to understand what is happening. But primarily, the challenge really comes down to kind of like how much noise should we insert into the data to ensure privacy while not degrading the signal to noise. And so the argument is fairly well established at this point that signal to noise is proportional to risk, right? So the more signal to noise that you have, or the closer that you stay to your base data, then the higher the risk for re-identification of an individual from those synthetic data. So we try to avoid this, and we'll talk a little bit about kind of like what differential privacy is and how that kind of allows us to maintain a framework where we can determine what the risk of associating or re-identifying an individual might be based on the model or the approach to generating synthetic data. So when we talk about synthetic data, there's always some regulatory or compliance considerations in mind. So one of the big pieces that impacts the approaches to using synthetic data or real data is HIPAA and GDPR requirements. So there is protected healthcare data where there are very strict rules around its use, and that the data must be fully de-identified to be exempt from these rules. So in general, the GDPR stance is very strong, and it basically ensures that personal data is defined in a very particular way. And so we need to be very, very cautious when using this. There are a number of additions to synthetic data which can be used to further mitigate and align with the legal principles of data minimization and accountability. And these are federated learning and differential privacy. And we'll go into those in the next few slides. And then the last component of regulatory and compliance considerations, especially when working in healthcare and life sciences, is auditability. So there's the kind of the need to manage and have chain of custody around synthetic data sets to be able to prove compliance. So before we kind of touch on that, I want to talk about a few examples. One obviously is a case study about the Cynthia project. This is an open source tool that enables data scientists or engineers to generate lifelike patient records by simulating diseases and treatments. So as you can see here, there are a number of inputs to this type of model. You can see that there's kind of census demographics. There's also clinical care maps. There's data sets. There's also providers and cost data. And all of this data can go into creating a synthetic population. And then this can be kind of exported to compatible data formats so that they can then be used by data scientists or engineers to test systems or to build models. And there's fairly widespread use of Cynthia. So this is a really nice project to look at and try to work with when you're considering synthetic data for healthcare. So given that we're talking about generating a data set that is synthetic, one of the questions is how do we define a privacy metric which enables us to guarantee that there is almost nothing about a single individual captured in that data set. And so differential privacy is a formulation which enables us to do this. And it's essentially a way of calibrating the noise into the model that now enables us to kind of essentially pressure test any analysis. So there's an equation here, and what I'm showing is one of the simpler forms of differential privacy. This is called pure epsilon differential privacy. And really what we're doing is we're saying one data set which contains information about an individual and another data set which doesn't contain that information about that single individual. What is the probability that those two outcomes can be differentiated from one another? And this gives rise to this value of epsilon. So the mechanism then, what we can do is we can then add calibrated noise to the query answers or the model training to ensure that we reach that level of privacy. So a low value of epsilon means a very strong level of privacy, and a very high value of epsilon means that we have essentially perfect accuracy, which means that we're able to reproduce the population without noise. Right, so we're looking essentially for lower values, which will improve privacy for the individuals in the data sets that are generated. So when we think about this differential privacy in machine learning practice, there's actually a number of different approaches. So there's essentially algorithms for gradient descent that can be used, and these ensure that the differential privacy is obtained. So there are fantastic examples of this. There are open source libraries like TensorFlow Privacy is a great example. And these types of differential privacy are actually used in data analytics by Apple. So they use this type of technology, and also the US Census was analyzed with differential privacy as well. So this is a very common method, and it enables the development of very strong approaches to understanding how private a data set might be. So you get a metric out of that. So there's, as I've said, there's always this kind of tuning of epsilon, and this enables the privacy guarantee to be kind of determined against the model accuracy. So there is always a trade-off, and this is shown here on the right-hand side. You can see that as accuracy drops off, then obviously privacy improves. And so it comes down to the practitioners that are working on the particular problem or challenge with the synthetic data to understand kind of where they need to be on the scale, right? In certain instances, you may be wanting to maintain a high amount of accuracy. So maybe there's a slightly different decision made about privacy compared to another situation where privacy is the most important consideration, and that you're prepared for compromised accuracy as a result. So the synthetic data generation, then differential privacy can be applied in generative models, and then this can also, again, kind of prevent memorization of real data. So going back to the GAN that I showed earlier, where we were generating synthetic data, there is already mechanisms and models in place that will enable you to use these for creating synthetic data with differential privacy in mind. So another concept that goes very well with synthetic data and some of the privacy by design arguments is federated learning. And this is a concept where data does not leave the location where it is, and it stays on a user's device, or it stays in the hospital system, and doesn't change or move. And the important thing here to understand is that this kind of decentralized training really enables kind of multiple organizations to train models based on their local data, but then also to share those models and not the data back up to a central location where those models are then combined and then passed back down to those individual organizations. And what this enables then, if you cycle through this, is that none of the data is moving to a central location. And so this is very good because it means that none of the data cannot be compromised in one location, but it's actually stays in those locations under those particular security and privacy kind of mechanisms. And then at the same time, what we're doing is we're just passing up gradients or parameters from those models to the central location. So again, it's very difficult to get identifiable information out of those if they're compromised. So this then kind of allows an organization to take privacy by design architectures. So the raw data never really leaves the source, and this is reducing the breach risk for the organizations involved in federated learning. Of course, the advantage for those organizations is that they are essentially able to train models with larger data sets. And so the combined models, which are shared back to those organizations, ultimately are of higher quality potentially, or cover a large number of potential future predictions, just simply because the number of sites may enable significantly large data sets to be available for this combined federated learning than an individual site might have. And these can enable deployments across many different kind of sites, right? So you could think about banks or hospitals, but you can also think about individual devices, right? So phones or other devices or instruments that may be in the world, but that we don't want to move data around. So the image on the right-hand side is showing kind of an approach that generally happens in federated learning. You start with a central location, not having any information, and that the individual sites may fit the model, or the model may be passed from a central location down to the individual sites, to where the individual sites will then train those models and then pass those models back to the central location. The central location then uses those models and combines those weights to be able to create an aggregate model, which is then passed back down to the individual sites, and they may again evaluate those models and then pass gradients back to the central location so that the model can be improved. And iterating on this, ultimately what you end up with is a better model that fits well the data at all of the various different locations. So with all of that in mind, right, we can start to think about how federated learning might impact healthcare. So collaborative research is one of the areas where federated learning can have real impact. So hospitals might train shared models like disease detection, or it could be readmittance probability without pooling the data, right? So this means that organizations don't necessarily need to share data with one another, but that they can take advantage of the full aggregation. So the end result is improved models where aggregating knowledge from multiple sites yields a more robust model. The addition is that latency and freshness So this enables real-time updates as each site learns from its newest data, right? So this would mean that organizations, they may require some level of data to be able to retrain their models, and that level of data spread across multiple organizations may be faster to accrue, so then those models can be developed and be more up to date. So some good examples of this, we've seen that organizations that are using kind of EHR analytics, federated learning can match centralized performance while kind of keeping data on premise. So this means that you have the privacy management for an organization, while at the same time enabling data development and model training. So a good example of this that I've just alluded to is the Cacao Healthcare example. And this is an architecture which was developed by Google Cloud for Cacao Healthcare. And some links to this project are given at the end of this presentation. But this is a cloud data platform that's built on Google Cloud, and it allows organizations to kind of like take an infrastructure and then ingest and manage the hospital data. And this also enables federated learning across those particular sites. So in this case, then the privacy pipeline is the first component, and this is looking for patient identifiers and anonymizing the on-site data and then loading it into the cloud database. Then across the organization, there's federated analytics. So AI models are then trained locally at each hospital, and then there is central aggregation of insights and model predictions. And then this enables the organization to have a scalable network of hospitals which are sharing knowledge and not raw data. And this is really the pivotal kind of unlock for organizations. And this case study is a nice example of this. Another case study, which is not related to healthcare, but is more related to life sciences, and was recently discussed in the news, is the TuneLab that was developed by Eli Lilly and Rhino Health. And this is a collaborative AI platform. So TuneLab is connecting the pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly with biotech partners for joint drug discovery models. So this enables federated model training, where the partners can train models on their proprietary data, and then only the model insights are shared. So again, the raw data within those organizations is not being shared or combined, but it's just the models which are being transferred. So you can see an example here on the right-hand side, where there's a global model that is passed to various different organizations in the network. They then use their private data to train local models, and then these local models, the weights are then passed back to the federated learning servers, which enable aggregation and then kind of like harmonizing of those models back into the global model. And moving around this cycle then, this enables the models again to improve over time or with additional data, and that all of the organizations are getting an improved model which is taking advantage of data being generated by all of those different organizations. So the tech stack in this instance is using Rhino Health Tech's federated computed framework, and also generative AI models, which are developed by the organizations. And the impact is really that it's allowing organizations to co-develop AI models securely, and this is enabling organizations to accelerate their research and development. In the publicly disclosed information, when TuneLab was announced by Lilly, they shared that that they've spent a huge amount of money in developing the data and the models associated with this platform, and so that then enables the biotech companies that don't have those resources in terms of data or models to take advantage of this by engaging with Lilly through the TuneLab. So given that we've kind of spent the last half hour talking about synthetic data and differential privacy concerns and also federated learning, one of the questions is kind of how do we put all of this together? And I think today what we're seeing is that all of this does kind of get combined in general, right? So there's synergy between differential privacy and synthetic data generation and then federated learning. So the concepts then are that federated learning with synthetic data, it really enables the use of data to pre-train models before federated fine-tuning, right? So in this case, what you see is that organizations are sharing models, but they're also kind of gaining value from different organizations. So an example of federated learning and differential privacy, Shukla et al. Have recently discussed an example where they were able to achieve very similar accuracy between the federated learning model versus the kind of the traditional approach, while maintaining an epsilon of approximately 2, which ensures very strong privacy for the data. And this is a nice example. Obviously, it comes from cancer diagnosis, but it shows that the concepts that we've discussed here are actually having kind of real tangible improvements in terms of privacy for organizations and for individuals, and also at the same time limiting the loss of accuracy of the models. So this is really showing that there is really high utility to kind of improving and utilizing these types of technologies together to ensure that that data privacy is maintained, and also ensuring that that synthetic data does not have any identifiable information for an individual. So as I kind of come towards the end of what I wanted to share today, I wanted to reflect on a few future trends for healthcare and data science. So I've listed these out here, and I want to kind of go over them a little bit. So generative AI advances, so large language models, which could be kind of transformers or diffusion, will continue to push the boundaries of synthetic data, and will be able to create even more realistic synthetic data sets, especially when it comes to medical text and high resolution images. We're also expecting that digital twins will continue to play a really important role in discovery and development. This means that patient-specific synthetic data avatars for personal simulation of treatments becomes feasible, and this enables then prediction of future states based on an individual's information. There's also edge and secure computing, right? So combining federated learning with secure enclaves and homeomorphic encryption kind of offer opportunities to kind of like improve on-device privacy. And then we also see that there is an evolving regulatory environment in which these technologies are potentially playing, right? So we expect to continue to see development of guidelines that define the utilization of synthetic data and federated AI across these industries. And finally, there's ethical AI, right? So there's an ongoing and continued focus on fairness and privacy. And so synthetic data can really help balance data sets, but also enable these very strong privacy metrics to be derived, which enable auditing of bias and also privacy for organizations. So with that, I'd like to close up with a few kind of summaries and key takeaways. Synthetic data as a tool kind of enables the innovation to be accelerated, providing kind of realistic data sets while protecting patient privacy or individual privacy. There's obviously privacy technologies that we've discussed, right? So federated learning and differential privacy. And these offer kind of provable guarantees and compliance alignment. We've also talked about some case studies that show that there is real world impact to utilizing these technologies. But there are also still some challenges that remain, right? Data fidelity and bias are continued areas of evolution, and regulation will require kind of careful attention moving forward. So I would just kind of like to finish with this concept that the future of AI in healthcare will be powered by data that is safe, scalable, and ethically managed. And so some of the assumptions that we use today around data sharing and data analysis will continue to change. And I hope that some of these concepts that we've discussed and shared today will start that discussion and help you and your organizations adapt to the continuing future state of these topics. So with that, I would just like to say thank you very much, and happy to answer any questions that people might have.
Thank you, Robert, for this great talk and in-depth introduction into synthetic data with all those real use cases. And let's check our questions. Our audience is very active, and we've got a lot of questions. So the first one from Anastasia: when generating patient data, do systems take into account statistical factors for a population, like fraction for ages and some genetic diseases more specific for some nation or location?
Yeah, that's a really great question, right? And there are two ways to answer this, I guess. Yeah, one of the huge benefits around synthetic data is that you can manage and apply balancing to any particular component that you are generating. So let's say you have a subpopulation that you want to increase or rebalance for, you can certainly do this. And it's just a case of building this into your generator methods or downstream processing to ensure that balance becomes relevant. It's also feasible to then look at this problem a different way and actually try to understand if that is something that happens in the real world. So do you expect this to happen in another space? And so federated learning might actually enable you to make that observation at one site and then confirm that observation in a different site. So there's various different ways that one can think about this. But yes, in general, you can bias your generators to any particular distribution that you want. And if you want to enforce relationships between certain characteristics, then you can also do this as well, right? And models will learn that if there is that kind of like that base information or that base tendency within the data that you're using to create that generator.
Thank you. Does it mean like when we collected all those knowledge pieces from different sources, we can fine-tune the desired output of the model to generate some specific small set which is required for some specific application or test or whatever, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, so there's just the concept of data augmentation as well, right? So if you know that you're looking for a certain subset and you have a generative model which is enabling you to pull samples from that global population and you want just a small subset, as long as you have a test or a way of identifying that small subset, you can generate essentially infinite numbers of samples from that population and then throw away whatever you don't want, so that you just have this larger population of the group that you're interested in, right? So I guess the argument would be my sock drawer, right? So I have a lot of red socks and one blue sock. So if I have a generator for socks and I want a blue pair, then I need to probably generate my sock drawer 50 or 60 times. So, and then throw away all the red socks so that I have a large pool of blue socks. And this would be the type of approach that one would use here. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question is, how can we benchmark synthetic data sets against real-world clinical data for nuance and completeness?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I would say that's one of the big challenges that we see, right? So there are always people that are very concerned about synthetic data, right? And I would say that this is just one of the opinions that we have, right? And it's interesting to see that there's also mistakes or errors in real data, right? So we don't know, and I would say this is always the challenge. Like, how do you prove that your synthetic data is as good as real data, right? This is an age-old question, right? We could make an analogy, but I think probably the most honest viewpoint is that synthetic data should capture all of the characteristics of the real data. But if an organization cannot accept that synthetic data is useful for the application, then by all means they should use the real data for that application, right? Whatever that application is. I think the advantage of synthetic data is that you may be able to use that to test the system, right? Or the model, or your expectation that you should be able to predict X. And that then once you have that in hand, it makes it much easier to help the review boards and to get access to the real data so that you can build the model or do the analytics that you desire, right? So I don't think it's necessarily always required to prove that, right, to an absolute doubt that the synthetic data captures everything of the real data. When you get to that point, usually it's best just to say, okay, eventually we will do this with the real data, but let's start with the synthetic data. If we can generate that faster and answer the questions potentially, or at least make the first step towards understanding if the question is relevant. And then once you have that, I would always prefer to work with the real data, but that might be a second step.
I see. So real data will never die, I would say, right?
That's right. I
We
mean,
will
yeah,
need
and
it
the real data is
at
needed to
some
create the
final
synthetic data,
stage.
right? So it's
We cannot live without real data. So
that's right. Yeah. No, I would agree with that 100%. Yeah.
okay, thank you. The next question. Um, Are there any commercial products available on the market for AI-driven synthetic data generation for um, can you recommend one of them
Yeah,
if any exist?
yeah. So there are a few companies that are out there that provide this. So Rhino Health does a nice job in this space. There's also a few other companies that I could potentially recommend. I'd need to know a little bit more about the industry and other things to give you a good answer here. But in general, there's also just a lot of good open source solutions. So depending on kind of like what the industry space is, then we see different types of things. Also, when there's a centralized IT organization, then maybe the use of commercial tools is maybe less relevant because your central IT can actually help you to build a federated example. So in certain industries, maybe an example might be an industry where you have different departments within an organization, and generally they don't or shouldn't necessarily talk with one another or share data, or that's not possible because of the regulations. So then federation, even within an organization, might enable you to improve analytics or productivity without having to do that. And that's something that you could use one of the open source solutions for as well. I did show the Cacao Health example for federated learning, and this is a very standard pattern for deploying this. And Google actually has a federated framework that one could use as well, and is fairly complete.
Mhm. Thank you. There is another question regarding patents approval for processing their data. Do we need to have a sign of patents signed to start processing this data when we're collecting it?
Right. So that's a really great question. I'm not a lawyer, so I should say that up front. So I'm not proposing the solution here, but I do know that there are requirements around the utilization of data. Sometimes when data is collected, it is already authorized, or that consent is captured at the time of data capture. Other times, the data needs to be reconsented by the individual who shared that data. So there are very strong regulations around how all of this is managed. And yeah, you should consult with your organization or the data owners to really understand what the status of particular data is, and what can and cannot be done.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, legal aspects are always important, and we should be
Yeah.
aware about any possible consequences if we fit something into a
Mhm.
model.
That's right. But at the
Mm,
same time, I think a lot of organizations have solved and have like very good guidelines. The organizations that I work with in general, they are very good at helping and facilitating that data to become available. It's just that there will often be a process that's required. But most organizations and institutes understand kind of like what that needs to be, and the process is defined. So there's it shouldn't be a thing to be scared of. It's just a thing to be aware of, and to approach that correctly. I think that there's a good example would be the UK Biobank. There is a lot of control around this data, right? You cannot take the data out. There's many different control mechanisms and regulation there. But at the same time, there is also an open source project that provides a synthetic data set or a synthetic generator, so that if you want, you can take a snapshot of synthetic data that will give you an idea of what it is in that data set, so that you don't need to go through the process of applying and regulation and everything else. You can
mhm.
actually just get started by doing a copy or a download of that synthetic data. So
So
this
you,
kind of shows the opportunity here, right? That even though there is like strong privacy requirements, once the synthetic data has been validated and you have that validated mechanism for generating synthetic data, then many of those regulations and hurdles kind of start to go away. So this is a perfect question, and drives at the real opportunity here, I think.
yeah, it's a quick way to test if the data set fits your needs or not, and
Exactly. Yeah.
you can do it like in a days instead of
Mhm.
months.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Robert. And we run out of time. The last very short question from my side. If our community members want to learn more about synthetic data, can you recommend some sources to start with?
Yeah, definitely. So I have a slide right at the end here. There's a number of resources that you might want to check out. In particular, there are a couple of papers here at the top that talk about a few examples. There's also a link to the press releases from Rhino Health and Eli Lilly, and their discussion of their platform for biotechs with the Tune Lab. Also links here about the Google Cloud work with Keiko Healthcare on federated learning. And then if you want to discuss these topics further, I'm always available. And yeah, I'm really passionate about this area, is that it just seems to make things significantly easier for organizations that want to be data driven.
Mhm. Thank you, Robert. And there are a few more questions on the portal page. I would like to ask you to answer them in the chat after the call. And thank you for presenting this great talk today. Thank you all who attended this call, and please don't forget to rate this event on the event page. Give speaker a badge, and please stay tuned for more content like this in our future DataZen events. Thank you all. Thank you,
Yeah, thank
Robert.
you very much. Thank you for
Bye.
having me. It's been a pleasure. Bye.
Bye bye.